Albany University and their medical school program in wrestling. I'm going to be a medical doctor. I was and our wrestling team, you were there for one reason, to make an Olympic team. It wasn't just to wrestle in college. You had greater aspirations. And I got a shoulder injury and was seeing the orthopedic doctor that I was studying under. I wanted to be just like Dr. Worth, Olympic level orthopedist that worked for the team. All of the treatments failed and inevitably left me with a bleeding ulcer at the age of 19. Since I couldn't take the drugs anymore and I didn't want to keep seeing him, somebody said, why don't you go see a chiropractor? Like, well, what's a chiropractor? So they explained it's just a doctor that doesn't use drugs. Chiropractor adjusted me once, solved a 4-year-old shoulder problem. So I went to the head of medicine at Albany University and said, hey, I'm going to switch my medical profession from orthopedist to chiropractor, not knowing that there was this rub between medicine and chiropractic. And he said to me, why do you want to be a witch doctor? And as my personality goes, that only made me more excited to do it. I'm like, oh, adults hate this? This sounds really great. And so that was my inspiration. And then my brothers just saw how well it went for me. And I think they just said, that looks good. We'll just be what Ben is.
Well, welcome to the Vitalistic Voice. I'm Dr. Colin Elkin. Today is a great day for me because this is a friend, a mentor, a coach that I've had for many, many years. I got introduced to him back in the mid 90s. It was at DE, and I don't know if you know this, but I watched Dr. Ben Lerner speak on stage, and he was right before Dr. Rob Schiffman actually. And it was mind-blowing listening to these two guys talk. And I remember at the time Ben was in practice and full-time practice, seeing 2,000 visits a week, which to me at the time was just incomprehensible. So I started following him and followed his career and got really inspired by the Body by God movement and then his book, and got into Body by God and got coached from him. And I'm going to tell you, so this is a long introduction, but I think it's well deserved. I could probably spend a lot more time. But what I know about Dr. Ben Lerner is that you go all in on everything that you do. When you have a vision about something and you're committed to something, you don't hold back. It's whether it's writing a book, whether it's getting involved on the Olympic team, going to the Olympics, whether it's coaching or opening a coaching program, opening offices, because you've opened, hundreds and hundreds of offices over the years. I'm just in full admiration of everything that you've done for the profession and just your leadership ability. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today, Dr. Ben Lerner.
Well, thanks for having me, Doc. It's good to see you again.
I'd love to start back because, you've got such a history in the profession of chiropractic, but I'd really like to know, and I know our viewers would like to know, is you've developed incredible leadership skills. So let's go back in your lifetime. What do you think helped define that and helped grow those leadership skills to drive you into the profession of chiropractic? In other words, what attracted you to the profession of chiropractic, knowing that you, with your ability, could have done anything you wanted to do?
Oh, one thing, you mentioned in the introduction, Dr. Schiffman's, Dr. Rob and I, we've been partners the last 8 years in Christ-centered chiropractic. And that was something, going back to originally you mentioned Body by God, which was originally what Max Living was. And if there's one kind of little regret I had there for a period of time was that we turned it into Max Living instead of Body by God. And that was to try to be a little less exclusive. We'd kind of cut out anybody that didn't consider themselves a Christian. But now that we have really focused on doing it all for God again, there really is this sort of incandescent joy that comes when you're just totally immersed in serving God, serving Jesus, and just helping other doctors coming alongside them to discover the power of working in the kingdom and see how that creates not only their greatest practice, but their best possible life. And I think that kind of ties into the question, which is, are you doing it for man or are you doing it for God? And so when it comes to leadership and just a commitment to anything that I do, it's because I've decided that this is something God wants me to do for him and to change the world. So whether it was a wrestler back in high school, in college, or whether it was starting a chiropractic clinic and wanting it to be the absolute biggest and best that was out there, or getting into something like chiropractic consulting or helping another doctor open up a clinic, it's always you're doing it for God and to save the world. So it's a very different perspective, both in terms of self-sacrifice and commitment, but also in the essence of your leadership.
Tell us a little bit about the way that you and your two brothers, who I know were brought up, and what and who inspired you during your upbringing to go into chiropractic and eventually end up at Life College or Life University at the time? Who were the biggest influencers on your life?
Yes, I don't know that our upbringing necessarily inspired us to get into chiropractic, other than we watched our parents literally lifestyling themselves to death. So they smoked cigarettes, they didn't eat well, they didn't exercise, so they had this lifestyle that, as a kid, you didn't know how to change it. You just knew this has got to end badly. And so my dad died at a really young age, and in his early 50s. My mom had a stroke in her 40s. And that's really what inspired me to, for example, write books. So we've at this point written 20 books and in 140 languages, and just get this message around the world that if you don't take care of yourself, you can die young and leave your kids without a mom and dad. That's certainly inspired all of that. Really, I got into chiropractic. I was going to be a medical doctor. I was at Albany University in their medical school program in wrestling. And our wrestling team, you were there for one reason: to make an Olympic team. It wasn't just to wrestle in college. You had greater aspirations. And I got a shoulder injury and was seeing the orthopedic doctor that I was studying under. I wanted to be just like Dr. Worth, this Olympic level orthopedist that worked for the team. And all of the treatments failed and inevitably left me with a bleeding ulcer at the age of 19. And since I couldn't take the drugs anymore and I didn't want to keep seeing him, somebody said, "Why don't you go see a chiropractor?" I'm like, "Well, what's a chiropractor?" So they explained it's just a doctor that doesn't use drugs. Chiropractor adjusted me once, solved a 4-year-old shoulder problem. So I went to the head of medicine at Albany University and said, "Hey, I'm going to switch my medical profession from orthopedist to chiropractor," not knowing that there was this rub between medicine and chiropractic. And he said to me, "Why do you want to be a witch doctor?" And as my personality goes, that only made me more excited to do it. I'm like, "Oh, adults hate this? This sounds really great." And so that was my inspiration. And then my brothers just saw how well it went for me. And I think they just said, "That looks good. We'll just be what Ben is."
That's awesome. So what took you after Life College, after graduating, what took you to Orlando if you grew up in the northeastern part of the United States?
Well, most of it was just going to Life in Georgia and looking at my parents up there in Boston, thinking they were nuts. So I went to college in Albany. I went even further north. I wasn't too far from you guys in Canada, and realized, hey, wait, it doesn't have to be frozen over 10 months of the year. So I just kept heading south. So that's how I ended up in Florida.
And then tell us a little bit about the transition. So you had a practice in Orlando. You were very actively involved in a lot of seminar programs, going to DE and speaking, and then started Body by God, partnering up with Dr. Lohman. Tell us about that transition and some of the highlights of what you remember in that time.
Yeah, as far as the volume and a lot of the big things we built, some of that just the nature of me being a competitive person. So I went from trying to make an Olympic team to trying to be the best possible chiropractor that you could be. And so we wanted to build something big. So we built eventually what became 5 clinics in Central Florida. And then I took my main clinic and brought that to 2,000 a week, until I realized that it wasn't enough, that if we're going to change the world, we couldn't just do it in Central Florida. And that's what got me into coaching, that I'm going to have to start teaching this to other doctors if I'm going to really reach the masses. So started coaching locally. We'd all meet at my clinic on Tuesday mornings. I'd have all the doctors from the 4 clinics there. All those doctors in those 4 clinics have gone on to become famous doctors. So Dan Yachter, Paul Sorci, Tony Nalda, I mean, everybody, Eric Lerner, all of them became really well-known, hugely successful chiropractors from that group of 5 clinics. But then these other guys that came in and trained with us also went on to become really successful. And that's when we, partnered up to create Body by God. And, again, with the intention of taking this principle of chiropractic, this life-saving message, to serve God and save lives to the nations. So starting with our country and then moving to Canada, just get this message to the world.
And that's one thing I recall, and it was at the time, I believe Body by God was one of the biggest coaching programs in the profession, and could brag about the number of chiropractors that grew their practices well over 1,000 a week, us included. So, and I can't obviously I can't say enough about the systems and the inspiration that we got by just surrounding ourselves with the same group of people. But I give you tremendous credit because you were definitely the leader of that movement, and I just want to say that with that leadership comes a huge responsibility, and obviously going into the profession with that with that mindset. What can you talk a little bit about what your big vision is for the profession and what truly drives you now about continuing to be in this circle?
Yeah, as a profession, of course, the people that stood before me, there was a lot of great men whose shoulders I stand upon to have can try to continue it with what we started there that we've been talking about here. But like them and me as well, hitting our heads in a ceiling, chiropractic really not breaking through to the levels that we wanted it to. And a lot of that's really the limitations we have as individuals. So at one point, I just found myself limited as a leader, actually, and we weren't really still getting anywhere. And so I actually went back to school. So I went back and got my master's in something called IO psychology, industrial and organizational psychology, which is like a business psychology and how to build healthy corporate structure. And then went on and now getting the PhD in business. So that was really the next evolution, was to go take myself to another level, because I had really hit my Peter principle as a chiropractor trying to do really big things. And so, really, as far as a vision for chiropractic, it's really a vision for health in general. So, again, I mentioned my parents died very young and weren't very healthy, and then went out and saw tens of thousands, millions of patients myself, and helped other doctors reach millions of patients as well, but still seeing as a country, just looking at individuals, not really progressing. Like we're still a very sick nation. Maybe some of that'll change now, with some of the changes we're seeing out there in our leadership, but needing to do more. So, the goal really is a healthier world. And now we've been able to, through a greater understanding of psychology, the psychology of people, a better ability to lead staff to help us get the message out there, and with a better business model for chiropractic that allows it to scale and to help people on a more aggressive way. And even with some things that work in parallel with chiropractic to help people get healthy. Now the vision is, again, to keep changing healthcare, saving lives, and making the world, as BJ said, a better place for decent people to live.
And I'm going to get your comments on this thought because, and I know you're going to have some brilliant comments on this thought, is that taking a stand in your philosophical viewpoint and the way that you practice chiropractic and get that out there into the world. And I remember here, at DE, it totally transformed my thinking because I graduated from a school that was not philosophically based. And it was something that I really resonated with. And so getting into practice and practicing in a subluxation, a vitalistic type of model, a corrective care model, sometimes we become very opinionated on the way that we practice is the only way to practice or the right way to practice. Hence, we used to talk about hate straights and so on. How has your philosophical viewpoint changed over those years? And perhaps I should reword that and say, how has your uh, acceptance of different philosophical viewpoints changed over the years so that we can therefore continue to advance the profession in a big way?
Yeah, man, I was literally taught to hate anybody who was not just a absolute straight chiropractor. In fact, when I got out of school, I became friends with a local chiropractor, and we became really close, and we're hanging out and doing a lot of things even within chiropractic together. And then I visited his clinic and saw machines in there, and never spoke to him again to this day. So like that was the end of our relationship, because, oh my God, you're a bloody mixer. That's evolved dramatically, for sure. So, I still think there's still the sanctity and the purity of chiropractic. I think other things aren't chiropractic. What's changed for me and a lot of people, thankfully, within chiropractic, is that you can have, in parallel to that pure chiropractic, you can have other things you provide for people that they need. For you and I, who haven't gotten younger over 40 years or ever we've been at this thing, you have other things that are of value. So nutrition is a value for me in my life. Fitness is a value to me in my life. My wife and I have just being endurance racers for many years, marathons, Ironmans. Hips, knees, you do that stuff for 30 years. I've had some stem cells in the hip. I've had some PRP in the knees and the shoulders. I've had things that I've needed because they've broken down with all the abuse that I've given them that allow me to still go really, really hard in fitness, here in my 50s. And so, so I've become much more acceptance of other what we call verticals, to where we still have the sanctity of chiropractic within an office, but other things you can provide for people that, again, are a better business model, but also another way to help people, as well as the fact that, the reality of what we're trying to do is we're trying to be something that's not medicine. Because when people come to us and the only thing they think is possible right now is medicine, that is not an alternative. That's not a possibility. It's not something we can let them do, because medicine ruins their lives. So I want to make sure that I've got the tools necessary to heal the sickest of the sick people. So yeah, there's definitely been a major evolution. I don't think in my philosophy of chiropractic, there's been a major evolution in my model of a chiropractic clinic and that business.
One thing that Kim and I always talked about when we were in practice, and we would often have on our date night, of course, being in practice together, we would talk about the practice, unfortunately, but it always ended up in that conversation. And one thing we always said is that we have an incredibly great business, but we often referred to it as not a business. It was really a very, very successful job that we'd created because we had to be there. So one of the things that we started trying to work on was trying to create it into a business with additional income streams that would give us some freedom in our financial portfolio and our time, mostly our time. So now that we've opened that door, so tell us now how your deliverability of your coaching is a little different than what it used to be when I first met you 25, 30 years ago. How is that different? Because I've heard you say that 150 a week is now the new seven-figure practice.
Yeah, it's radically different. Unfortunately, high volume practice became also a business model, and generally a poor business model at that. Because of my 2 degrees, I did have the opportunity. I was actually the COO of a publicly traded company for a couple of years, and really got some keen insights into what business looks like on Wall Street at the biggest level, and got to interact with a lot of other publicly traded companies and leaders of other publicly traded companies. And one of the things that I noticed there is that the CEO of my company, he didn't work day to day. Like, so I was busting my butt as the operating officer over, 19 locations over the, North America. And then the chairman of the board, the guy who's really in charge, I never met him. He never came to work. So the guy that was making the big money, that really ultimately called all the shots, he didn't have to go to work at all. He's on the golf course, or having meetings in his home, drinking coffee, and probably drinking some other things too. And he was having the most fun. So I'm like, I want to be the chairman of the board, not the guy who's the tech manager or the technician in the clinic. So that's ultimately the goal that everybody should have with a business. Like you said, it's really a business and not a job. Ultimately, you want to be the chairman of the board. That's what you're working towards. And so, we try to take our clients on that journey. But by really changing the model of practice, it goes back to, and this kind of came out of when I got my master's in the IO psychology, where I realized that we took doctors in the old days that we were coaching, and still this is really common with most coaching programs now, that unless you built a high volume clinic, you couldn't be successful. And so if you could only see 150 a week, well, I guess you're a failure. But if that's your personality, if that's all you can do, if that's just who you are, why shouldn't they be successful also? So that's a big change, because, from coaching with me in the past, back in those days, it was 1,000 or bust. And now really my focus is I want to grab somebody who's got 4 kids. She sees 75 a week, doesn't have any energy, ability, or desire to see more than 75 a week, and turn that person into a millionaire that's making a big impact with her patients and loves life and has a great family at home. Like that, it's a very different way of thinking about it. So you got to put a very different model in place.
So practically speaking now, how does that model differ? What are you suggesting, and what different streams of income are now put into a practice like that? Let's open that door.
Yeah. So like the first thing we'll get into is their care plans. Like, so you look at like sort of a really old school care plan where, I remember way back in the days, 15, 20 years ago, it's 100 visits for a couple $1,000 and then discounts for the family. And so, you look at those per visit collection averages, those CPVs, as we call it, they're, $10, $12, 15, 20, like that's what you're making per visit. So now our plans are coming in, we're looking for north of $100 per visit versus, 12 to 30. And in creating a value for care to where even on maintenance, you can be averaging, $80 to $100 on a wellness plan for an individual. So if you do the math on any of that, so we took a recent person, actually was one of my old clients from Maximize Living, completely transformed their plans. He's actually doing on his initial plan, he's doing 258 per visit, which is actually at 150 a week. He's going to be at $2 million a year at 150 a week. Again, most of the people are coming in around 120, 130 a visit. And again, if you do the math on that at 150 a week, again, you're at $1 million plus. So really making some intense adjustments to the plan, creating a lot of value for those visits. And that's just on straight chiropractic with a focus on corrective care. So that corrective care visit has a value. Again, we make sure people understand that value, communicate that in a way where they're willing to invest in that. And it doesn't take a lot of volume to get to $1 million with those sort of CPVs. So that's the first stage. Then we would get into verticals. So again, the sanctity of that chiropractic component is kept pure. That vertical is chiropractic. Nothing else is called chiropractic. But we can have a vertical business where we have what we call BWBs, these businesses within the business that do offer other quality services that make a big impact in people's lives that a lot of people really badly need. And that's where now suddenly you get a guy like I just mentioned, where he's going to be more at $2 million for 150-week practice.
Yeah, this is incredible. This is great conversation, Ben, because here's the thing is that so even doctors that are still involved in other coaching programs and that I know personally are still doing a level of corrective care and not recouping that amount of profit or benefit from that level of care, but it's all about building value in the eyes of the patient. So what strategies now are you coaching that might be different from the past with those clients on how to build that value?
One we've really, something we learned actually, working when Tony came to work for me in Celebration at that clinic doing corrective care. A lot of people know he's got like a 1-a-week scoliosis treatment. So people are paying, several $1,000s for a week. So right there, it should open some people's eyes to the idea that, wow, somebody will come in for 1 week and pay several $1,000s. A lot of people, their year care plan isn't several $1,000s. And so if you're offering that kind of value where we know we're going to see change in your x-rays, we're going to see change in your nervous system, we're going to get correction just in that 7-day period, then obviously there's a lot of value that people are willing to pay for. So the other thing that realizes, let's say that 1 week is $3,000. What you realize from that is that people don't care if $3,000 is 1 week, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. $3,000 is $3,000. So if that's the number a doctor is comfortable with, all we're telling them initially is cut the number of visits that covers. So if you just do the math on that, if it's 3,000 for 60 visits versus now 3,000 for 12 visits, your CPV, what you're collecting per visit, is radically transformed. But the people are being charged the same amount of money, so they're going to react the same. Conversions are going to be the same, but retention is going to be a lot better. Another word that I brought into the equation that, again, I didn't read in the book, it's because of years of experience, is visit fatigue. So when people are on these $3,000 plans that are 6 months, it's hard to keep them on track because everybody gets fatigued. The staff gets fatigued. The patient's fatigued. I know you've run marathons too. It's a marathon of a program, and not a lot of people can complete a marathon. So also by tightening that down and getting back to like those 1-week plans, everybody resigns. Because who can't get through 1 week? There's zero visit fatigue. But you stretch that same thing out to 6 months, and now 30% of the people get through the plan. So by tightening those plans up, you get lots of benefit, a lot more resigns, much more per visit of a per visit average. So that's, one change of the model that we've really focused on.
Yeah, I love that. So, I just did a podcast with Tony Nalda last week, and Tony actually alluded to this exact same concept, and he used the example of getting your oil changed. And he said, so you can go get your oil changed, and they could tell you you'd have to get your oil changed over the next 12 visits here in our office, and it would cost you $2,000. Or would you rather come once and you could pay $4,000? Well, most people would pick the latter of the two, and I thought that was actually a pretty brilliant analogy. So it
Yeah.
basically a similar thing. So let's go into the BWB. Let's talk about the business within the business, because I know that's a big part of what you're talking about now. In fact, I spoke with a gentleman that is being coached by you named Brad Perez out on the West Coast just recently. Super nice guy, got a real successful practice out there. And so let's talk about some different strategies to help chiropractors start to look at additional streams of income within their clinic, within their office.
Yeah, Brad actually just made a trip to our clinic here just a couple weeks ago and trained in the clinic with the staff with us just to learn one of the BWBs. Actually, he's phenomenal chiropractor. Got maybe one of the most successful practices in history, and also is one of the wealthiest chiropractors in history. He's also really brilliant in the real estate world. So yeah, amazing guy. Um, so this kind of the elephant in the room, right? Is like you brought up earlier, is the fact that, oh, we hate people that do other things besides chiropractic. One of the things that cracks me up about that. So if you had a good friend, Colin, who opened up a regenerative medicine business. So he hired a nurse practitioner and they're doing IV nutrition and they're doing stem cells. And your friend was incredibly successful in helping a lot of people. You'd be happy for your friend. But if that friend was a chiropractor, now they're evil. Now there's something insidious about that, and they need to, they won't even get to meet Jesus because they did regenerative medicine, and so the reality is, if we've got something that really helps people, and it's an enhancement to your business model on top of that, so greater impact to patients in your community, greater economic model, why is that bad? It's like that, and that's again, this dogma of chiropractic, these traditions we get steeped in over 100 years that we still follow. I think it's something chiropractors need to help themselves to break through. And so I'm glad I went back and got training in other universities outside of chiropractic so my brain can leave the echo chamber I've been stuck in, hearing from the same people over and over again and reading books that are 100 years old. It's all good stuff. Like, I love the principle of chiropractic. I love the philosophy. I've only grown to fall more in love with it and more passionate about it over a 30-year career. But I also have learned about the value of greater impact, reaching more people, and building a better business model. So with the BWBs, you can bring in anything. So we'll just say, because it's really popular out there now, let's say it's Shockwave. So Shockwave in my model is a separate business. So it's not added on top of the chiropractic, something more for the chiropractor to do, something that just gets folded right into the P&L on the chiropractic side. It's going to be its own business. It's going to have its own P&L. There's going to be somebody in the clinic who's responsible for it. And by responsible, it's their P&L, it's their KPIs, it's their goals and metrics relative to what we're looking to accomplish with the Shockwave. We're going to do marketing specifically for the Shockwave in the community. There's a number of ways we would market that. And so we've built a very successful Shockwave business in that practice that runs in parallel to the pure sanctity of the chiropractic business. And so we have, in fact, another one of the Maximize Living guys we're coaching right now. He's built a $35,000 a month just this year that we've been coaching him, $35,000 a month decompression business within the business. So the chiropractic is still doing the chiropractic thing, but now they're doing $35,000 a month additional this year in decompression. But we consider it's a different business. Again, somebody else manages it and runs it like it's its own business.
Well, and from that old hate straight philosophy, you could look at anything that's outside of adjusting atlases and axes as something as mixing, like you said, being a bloody mixer, your friend. And in the last few years of practice, we built a very successful nutrition program, and I took some courses, like yourself. I wanted to learn more about that and become an advanced, and it actually gave me a license to be able to have access for people to bill their insurance with the services that we were providing. So it was very helpful. It was helpful to the patients, and it was largely beneficial financially for our office. And some people would look at that as a mixing thing, but I always looked at that as something that was just adding on and creating more freedom for the business. It didn't change the philosophy at all. But here's the thing, and this is why I wanted to bring this up, because now that I'm out of practice, and one thing leads to another, and now we have a marketing company. So I have a marketing company and I market for chiropractors, and we have a very unique system that we uh, can market for chiropractors who want to position themselves in a philosophical, vitalistic, subluxation based or corrective model. And you can't do that when you're running pain-based ads. You're bringing in people who want pain relief. So it's repositioning offices into a vitalistic position. And it's been largely successful, but on the same time, it attracts a lot of haters. So now we have a position where we're attracting a lot of haters. So let's just kind of open that up. And I want to look at it from an advancement of the entire profession. Where do we have to go to overcome that?
Well, if I could answer that, but because I get a lot of haters too. So, and for me, again, I've gone and advanced myself to make the decisions that I'm making today. I've stepped out of the echo chambers of a lot of the groups that I was a part of to go think on my own and think more clearly and get input from people that are smarter than me, and billionaires that are smarter than the chiropractors. Not a lot of chiropractic billionaires. I don't think there's ever been one, but there's a lot of billionaires I'm now learning from that are guiding my decisions, again, outside of our box. And so I think at some point, we have to, and I think it's moving in that direction. We have to be willing to break outside our box to advance ourselves, the profession as a whole. And at some point, love each other, as Jesus would say. That was his command. He said the most important command was to love God, but that his command is to love each other. And so we've got to at some point look at it from that perspective. With the 150 is the new million, like you keep mentioning DE. Well, I got a lot of hate from those guys because they don't like the fact that I'm breaking the model that they believe in. And so we have to learn to appreciate and accept other people's models. Other groups that their model is the high volume, low fee, just kind of very old school. They don't like what I'm doing because it's not their model. And so we have to learn to be okay with other people's models for the good of the world, and not just say that this is chiropractic, and if that's not how you're practicing, you're a bad person. Because again, I have a very straight chiropractic client of mine who's now added other verticals, and he's very, he comes from a very straight background. He's surrounded by a lot of straight friends, and so he's trying to avoid them even finding out that he's doing some of these things, so they, that they'll keep speaking to him. But like he always says, and I love him for it, he's just always like, those things aren't chiropractic. He's like, that I'm not saying they're chiropractic. My chiropractic is still very pure. I'm just also able to add other businesses that allow me to reach other people in the community, again, build a better business overall, and, move in the direction you're moving to, where it's something you can sell as a higher quality, more sustainable business. So you can move on if you've got other dreams or vision for your life.
And I know that you will comment on this for sure, but a lot of people that were in the profession back in, through the late 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, who saw thousands of people a week who are either no longer in practice, have had broken relationships, or now have debilitating diseases, or are no longer with us. Because it is very taxing on you physically and mentally. Would you agree?
Yeah, and my mentors did not live very long. So all those guys that I followed when I was a young buck in school, all excited about going out to do 500 a week, those guys primarily died early, and I don't think their lives worked out all that well in many cases. And they didn't practice very long, a lot of them either. So I don't think that the people that stood before us did all that great with it, but yet we continue to follow suit. And I also, if you look even back at D.D. Palmer, B.J. Palmer, they had a lot of businesses. They did a lot of things in addition to chiropractic, whether it was to patients or on top of their chiropractic work. So we're not even following the traditions of the guys that started everything, whose names we utilize a lot in the straight world. So it just, again, it's not something I'm not going to step off my platform and step down to kind of the people who are, you know, cohorts of evil. I want to help the profession advance and, help individuals. I think something that also changed for me, you brought up the profession a lot. I probably early in my career was a little too focused on the profession when I first started coaching and moving it forward versus, just working with people and helping them. When you get down and you really look at the moms and dads that are just trying to make it as chiropractors, get through this challenging thing called being a chiropractor in their lives, I want to make sure that they're satisfied, they're happy, they're glad they went to chiropractic school, their kids can eat, they can establish some financial security and maybe even some affluence. The individual is important too.
Well, and I truly feel, and we were talking a little bit about the whole school system and advancing the profession. I think we as a profession need to advance the people within the school system to help them to be ultra successful, because ultra successful people will make changes in the direction of anything, whatever they're involved in. So let's just open that door as far as what do you foresee with the mindset that you have now and the direction that you're going in. How can that be adapted into the school system in a way to help people be more open-minded and more successful?
Yeah, I think certainly this should be taught. Again, I was taught to hate. I mean, that was, we'd sit there in assembly every week and be told who we should hate. So that was literally an indoctrination that we got through 3.5 years of chiropractic school. So when I got out, I'm like, okay, I know exactly who to hate now. So first of all, we should be taught how to love and how to get along and to honor the things that are the same versus the things that are different. So hopefully that becomes part of the curriculum at schools, moving forward at some point. And I think, just the idea of, just like you said, how do we become, how do we create a budget at home? How do we become financially successful? How do we build a business model that's sustainable and that doesn't leave us chained to the table? I would say if chiropractors really knew what that model was long term, they would never go to chiropractic school. If you knew that you were being taught to become a tech manager, where you had, as you mentioned earlier, a job versus a business, I don't know how many people would do it. We end up with a lot of people telling me when they first come asking for help, they feel chained to the table. I said, yeah, it's because you're a technician, so you'll never be unchained from the table until you become a CEO and ultimately the chairman of your organization. You got to change the model and how you're running things.
That's the interesting thing, and having had the opportunity to coach a lot of chiropractors myself over the years, we see this very often in the fact that there's really not a realization in many of those chiropractors' minds that they are actually an employee in their own business, and rather than this, as you mentioned, the CEO. And it's opening their mind to different thinking. And I applaud you for that, because that really is what you're doing. You're opening their minds to other things and creating really more success in many different avenues, not just financially, but in their ability to run a business as the manager or the CEO of that business, as opposed to, like you say, the technician.
And getting their economics under control. I don't know about you, but my mentors when I was getting out of school said I had to go through Greg Stanley. I don't think he's around anymore, but you had to go, you went through 6 sessions with Greg Stanley. So right off the bat, we were focused on getting out of debt, investing money, and looking to the future, to that point where you would no longer have to do it for money, because all your money would have multiplied and you'd be financially free. Just take care of people because you love taking care of people, serve God because you love serving God. You didn't have to do it for the money anymore. And so thankfully, that's been the track I've been on since I graduated. But that's not typical of your normal chiropractic experience, where they're actually thinking about building their financial future. So I think that's something that's likely missing in the schools, because I'm not certainly not seeing it with the doctors that are out there. So my wife and I thankfully haven't had to do anything for money in probably 10 years, because we thought about that the first 20, didn't have to worry about it now the last 10. And I don't think that's something that's, again, part of the curriculum either, that probably should be.
So I know you've got 3 kids. What are they up to? Are they inspired to follow after dad's footsteps?
No. So my oldest, so he Florida State graduate, he got into, I think what they really appreciate about me is the entrepreneurial aspect of my life. So they like that I've been able to do what I wanted to do and be my own boss and that kind of thing. So they, like my oldest son is, he's got his marketing degree, a second degree in business analytics. And now, so he now runs a company. It's an England-based company that he is the American leader for here in the States. And then my daughter, who's graduating college this year, wants to be a vet, but she wants to be a natural vet. She wants to change veterinary medicine, just like chiropractic changed traditional medicine. So she has that mindset. And she's a real champion. So she's a college diver. And when she got there, it was COVID, and they were insisting every athlete get the vax. And she was one of only two people that didn't. So she stood the test of time. They really punished her. I mean, she had to go through all sorts of hoops to be able to continue competing. They called her out. Like, the whole school knew she was this girl that was unvaxxed, and she didn't care. So she grew up with that chiropractic warrior spirit that I don't care if I have to go up against the system. I'm not going to succumb to what conventional medicine and just the traditional person thinks about. So I'm really proud of her, and she's just graduating. And again, she'll be a great natural vet, probably transform that whole profession. And then my youngest is a senior in high school, and he wants, his thing is entrepreneurism. He wants to go out there and light the world on fire in a different way.
Well, it's cool. It's got to be very fulfilling to see your kids gain the principles that you and Sherry have taught them over the years. And that, and as a parent myself with four boys, seeing them make decisions that are based on principles, whatever that decision leads them towards. But if it's based on the principles that we've taught them, then I feel like, we've done our job as parents. So what's next for Dr. Ben Lerner? What are because I mean, you live by your vision. You're quite a visionary. I'm sure you have some big visions on where does it go from here? What's next?
Yeah, I mean, with Christ-centered chiropractic, and we still envision the same thing, is just getting back to the early principles we embodied way back when, of chiropractors that are living life in Christ. Their practices are amazing, but so is their relationship with God. That what Dr. Schiff and I are doing there, that's still a really a big focus for us. I've got two other programs too. One that's just traditionally coaching chiropractors, both with this other kind of business model we've discussed, but then also doing a lot to help chiropractors bring in these other verticals, that not just for the sake of their business, but because of how much I'm seeing these other verticals help people. So that is a big part of the focus. Then from there, I've always got other, business lines that we're focused on as well. So I've got a mortgage and real estate company that we spend a lot of time in. And so that's the other kind of big sideline that I'm involved in as well. And we help a lot. I've done a lot with product manufacturing. So, we're actually helping a certain urologist, a medical doctor, to utilize nutrition versus using medications for his patients. So we've created an entire product line for him that he's now bringing to other urologists to try to transform that business to being very antibiotic based, to being more supplement based, just so always advancing things, whether it's chiropractic, other professions, or just, the economics, and just helping people also understand economics so that they can do better, to have financial security so they can do things for the right reasons as well.
Well, you've never been one that I've known to sit by the pool drinking pina coladas. So I give you tons of credit because you've always got something on the go. So this has been an absolute pleasure. I really, I certainly have missed you. I've missed your leadership, and I got to say, you're one of the most disciplined people that I know. I mean, obviously, your fitness and your nutrition are first and foremost in your life, behind being committed to Christ, and you still, even though I think we're roughly the same age, I might have a year or two on you, but you still look like you're in your mid-30s. So I give you tons of credit there.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, if you're doing it for God, and not man, then you realize this is the vessel that he's got to use to go out there and save the world. So you got to protect the bones.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dr. Ben Lerner, it's been an absolute pleasure. Definitely a great, great interview, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah, it's great seeing you again. Thanks for all you're doing to keep moving this vitalistic message along.